so many of the people who virtue signal on the environmental side, and this is particularly true in the political realm on the left, are doing that not because they care for the environment in the least, not if it came to actually making personal sacrifices for doing something about it. They want to be seen to be the saviors of the planet without doing any of the work, any of the background work, any of the research, any of the industrial innovation that would be necessary to carry it out. They want to be seen as experts without noting, for example, well, how the hell are you going to interconnect all the world's power grids together? Where are you going to get the wire? Where are you going to get the metal? And isn't it a problem, not only that wind works 10% of the time, but when it doesn't work, you have to have a parallel energy system in place. And if that's not nuclear, it has to be fossil fuels. And so then instead of having just a fossil fuel grid, let's say, for our electrified economy, you have to have a wind and a solar grid plus a fossil fuel grid. Well, how in the world could anyone with any sense whatsoever think that that constituted an improvement, especially when you also decide, let's say, to take nuclear out of the equation, which is the last thing you'd do if you actually cared about carbon dioxide production. And so for me, there is an element of care with regards to environmental sustainability, but there's a much larger element of being seen, to be seen praying in public, to put it bluntly, to be seen virtue signaling with no effort. And so that NDP in particular are good at that.
But it's interesting. I don't just blame the environmentalists, and I don't just blame the politicians. I do have to blame the companies themselves and the industry themselves. Michael Schellenberger, once again, he did an assessment of how did nuclear get demonized the way it did, and I think he's traced it to some proponents in the natural gas and traditional fuel industry that demonized nuclear. Well, then of course, wind and solar come along, and now they're the ones demonizing coal and oil and wind. And now we're in a position where, because they're trying to virtue signal, get a market advantage, I'm not sure. Now we have a situation where virtually none of our fuel sources are considered to be green enough. Nuclear has, of course, the issues of how you deal with the waste. Wind and coal, oil, and natural gas. We're dealing with carbon dioxide emissions. Hydroelectric, it's not considered green in the US because it damages biodiversity. You have to flood vast areas. So, and wind and solar, I mean, I think I may have made this point with you before. I'm sorry, like, as long as we're taking coal and turning it into solar panels, that is not a zero emissions product. As long as you're needing to use coal to create the steel that goes into the wind turbines, that is not a zero emissions product either. So if you want to start saying I'm greener than you have to look at the entire supply chain. And now we're in a point where there is no answer.
Right.
No green fuel.
That might have been the goal. Like if the goal is degrowth, deindustrialization, and population reduction, then the demonization of all industrial fuel sources is perfectly in keeping with the underlying ethos of the radical types. And that is what's been driving this, as you rightly pointed out, since the early 1960s.
I wonder if they've gone a step too far now, though, on attacking agriculture, because they've been waiting to do this. And I've been watching this for some time. I've been giving speeches for years telling our beef farmers as well as our other food producers that they started with a campaign against coal. They shifted to a campaign against fracking. They shifted again to a campaign against oil sands. Now they're shifting again to food production. And they were very delighted after COP28 to say, oh, good, we finally got food on the table. And I remember reading an article from an extreme environmental website decrying the fact that 80% of food production comes from fossil fuel energy. They need fossil fuels to be able to operate their equipment and be able to get the grain to market and do all the transportation. But when you attack our food producers, it dramatically backfires. Look what happened in the Netherlands. Denmark, I have just read, is now putting a tax on belching and flatulating cattle. $100 carbon tax on cows. And you have to wonder, at what point are people going to say enough is enough? Because I'll have to tell you, like, the next logical step is if belching and farting and breathing is now a sin, how long before they start putting a carbon tax on human beings? Because guess what? We're all belching and farting and breathing creatures as well. So I think they may have overplayed their hand in going after our food producers. Our food producers are some of our most highest esteemed industries and professionals in any economy, certainly far above lawyers and used car salesmen and politicians. And so to go after our food producers in this way, it doesn't make sense, especially since the entire practice of food production is understanding the carbon cycle. When you have a grain that you're producing, you have to capture CO2 from the air. It goes into the head of that grain, people eat it, and then it gets recycled again. The entire process of food production works with the carbon cycle. And so for them to be attacking the very nature of food production and how the carbon cycle works, I think they've gone too far. I think it's one thing to apply this weird paradigm on industry. I just don't think that they can carry it over to food production without having the kind of outcomes that we're seeing around the world, where farmers are pushing back and people are pushing back.